talk about the state legislature, it's easy to lose sight of what's happening at the local level, but those issues are still just as important. Jim Galloway, the AJC, is sticking with us to discuss. We now welcome in Representative Buzz Brockway. He's a Republican from Lawrenceville who serves on the House Governmental Affairs Committee, which focuses on local cities and municipalities. Representative Brockway, it's nice to have you on Lawmakers.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you for your service. We always want to say that to our state lawmakers. We know this is a quasi-volunteer job when you add up all the hours, and especially on the Governmental Affairs Committee, you know, which you guys can take up an awful lot of dry things, but there's nothing dry about the cityhood issue that we were talking about with Chairman Pitts earlier, and you all have been wrangling on whether or not the city of Eagles Landing ought to be carved out of the city of Stockbridge, and a pivotal part of that legislation is now sitting in your committee.
Right.
What do you know? What do you know about that? How do you feel about it?
Well, it's uncharted territory. We've dealt with a number of proposals to form new cities, but this is the first time where you're sort of de-annexing from one part of a city and to join another city at the same time. And so it's a whole other level of discussion, and I'm not sure. It's a little uncomfortable for me, frankly. I would rather see a group of united citizens come together and say this is what we want to do, because my preference would always be to let local communities vote. But this is uncharted territory, and I don't know. We have to think about all that and analyze all that.
What are some of the implications? I mean, we just heard Mr. Pitts, the chairman of the Fulton County Commission, wonder about whether this would have set a precedent for, say, Buckhead leaving Atlanta.
Yeah.
But the people, the city officials in Stockbridge are saying that this would reduce the tax base by half, and they've got something like $14 million in bonds out, and they're wondering how they would go about paying off those bonds. I mean, is there a concern about throwing a municipality into insolvency?
There is, yeah, and I think that's all has to be part of this discussion. What implications are taking place? I mean, normally you have those sorts of discussions with the county government, but in this case it's with another city. And of course, people in those areas, are they going to take on this debt, that their share of the debt that they represent, and those sorts of things? So it's very complicated, and I think maybe more complicated than just passing a bill very quickly and moving it through. I think we've got to be cautious and consider all of that. And
for folks who want to keep track, it's Senate Bill 263 that's still pending in your committee. Also in your committee, a couple of things a lot of people would like to see. SB 155 creates a local law enforcement compensation commission. An awful lot of folks don't think our public safety folks are paid enough.
Yeah, and that's always a concern. And we've had a number of proposals floating around. A lot of them seem to place a burden on local government and say, well, you need to give these folks a raise. And not every county is the same in Georgia. There are some local governments and cities, and two, of course, that are, if forcing a raise on them would be very difficult. So, should the state play a role in that? And there are some who think we should, and there are some who think we shouldn't. So, I think a commission to look at this is probably a good idea.
We've had House Speaker David Ralston kind of hint that he's not too fond of this idea. Am I correct?
I don't know. I will take your word for it.
You'll have to ask him, I guess.
I'll take your word for it.
There's been an awful lot of talk about voting machines. There's a Senate bill that you guys have right now. I can't remember the number. I think it's Bruce Thompson's bill, Senator Thompson's bill, that would revamp Georgia voting machines and create paper ballots that are less hackable. How do you feel about that?
And we should mention that he is a Republican candidate for Secretary of State,
yes,
whose job it would be to oversee elections.
Indeed.
Yes, thank you. As I've traveled the state, I hear this a lot from voters. They want to see some sort of paper component in the system that folks can look at, and that you can, in case of a recount, can actually touch a piece of paper and compare it to the machine. So I hear that a lot. So I think we're headed in the right direction. I think we do need some paper in the system. I think we need another part of the bill that I very much favor. The House and the Senate bills both contain this, was a post-election audit. And I think that's very important too, to help restore trust in our election system. Most of the country, about 70% of the country, votes with machines that have paper as part of the process. And I think Georgia should have that too as we move forward.
Would we be keeping the same system? I mean, right now, since these machines were brought in under Kathy Cox, the last Democratic Secretary of State, every county in Georgia and every city, for that matter, uses the same machine or the same technology. Is that something that you would like to see preserved, the uniformity?
I think uniformity is good, but there machines on the market that do sort of the same thing but have different approaches to it. So I think some states take the approach of here are a couple of approved machines and let county governments and local governments decide what they like. Personally, I like uniformity. I think that's probably the best thing.
Have you just out of curiosity, as a candidate for Secretary of State, have you taken any lessons in Russian hacking and how vulnerable our systems are?
Well, I think we have to acknowledge that every electronic device is hackable. So what you have to have is security systems around that to deal with that. And I think there is some hysteria about this, that people are convinced that elections have been stolen and this, that, and the other. I see no evidence of that any vote in Georgia has been stolen or hacked through some sort of hacking. But we do have to have security in and around the voting machine at all times.
Speaking of security, the state could ante up another $16 million to help public schools address security issues. You've got a seat on the Education Committee. Is that a wise use of the money, or would $16 million not really do much?
Oh, I think whether 16 is the right amount or not, I think that we have to take a look at this. I think obviously the shooting in Parkland in Florida was heartbreaking, and so whatever we can do to secure our schools and make sure students are safe, we need to examine it and take a look at it.
Is that the spending of the money is? I mean, would the school systems be allowed to prioritize as to say whether they hire a security guard or actually arm a few teachers or school administrators?
I would favor that. I think involving the local school systems in this decision would be very important. Some school systems might choose to arm teachers. There are my sheriff in Gwinnett County has offered free training for any teacher who wants to take advantage of that. There may be some who want to do that. Others may decide that it'd be better to have resource officers armed on the premises. So I prefer to leave that up to the school systems.
One of the things the Secretary of State in Georgia does is administer state licenses, and your resolution concerning the Georgia Occupational Regulation Review Council moved through. How should the Secretary of State's office streamline this process?
Well, the Regulation Review Council is supposed to generate periodic reports and give them to the legislature. Do we need to continue to license all these professions? Or do we have the right amount of regulation to protect the public from harm and fraud? And not too much would keep people who are otherwise qualified out, and too little would put the public at risk. So that was what I was pushing in that resolution. We need to make sure we're doing that. There are a lot of things that I think we need to take a look at. As I mentioned when I was testifying about that bill, emergency medical technicians need 110 hours of training. Barbers need 1,500. On the surface, maybe there's a good reason for that, but on the surface, that seems a little out of whack, and it's keeping people from a profession where they might be able to give themselves a job, start their own business, lift themselves out of poverty, and that's what we want to encourage.
You had a nice little figure.
I'm sorry, Jim. We're going to leave it there.
Oh,
the time has got us. Let's continue on. Let's continue after the cameras go off. This is a great discussion. Thank you so much, Representative Brockway. It's great to see you, Jim. It's always good. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Appreciate that. And also, always, you can track us on Facebook and Twitter at GPB News. Use hashtag GPB Lawmakers to join the conversation, and check out our website, gpb.org/lawmakers, where you can find full episodes of our show, watch the House and Senate live, and get behind-the-scenes videos. For more great political coverage, don't miss our GPB radio show, Political Rewind, hosted by Bill Nigut, live every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 2. Thanks for joining us tonight. We'll see you back here Wednesday for Legislative Day 31 on Lawmakers. We'll have plenty to talk about qualifying. People are lining up to run for office in Georgia. Isn't that great?